Her ex dragged her by the hair at a private party until the Mafia boss stepped in. The party smelled like power and rot. Champagne in crystal flutes, silk gowns, men with blood on their hands and smiles on their faces. I knew what kind of gathering this was the moment Rocco dragged me through the gilded front doors of Villa Corsini, a private estate perched on Rome's outskirts like a predator surveying its kill zone. I didn't want to be there. I never wanted to be anywhere he insisted on taking me. But saying no to Rocco Santori had a price I'd already paid too many times. My name is Eloen Marchesi. Most people called me El. Rocco called me his, like a brand he'd burned into my skin. I wore a deep crimson gown that night, backless, cinched at the waist, his choice, always his choice. He liked me visible, liked the way other men looked and the way he could remind them I wasn't theirs. I was a prop in a world I'd never asked to enter, a curator of ancient art by day, a mafia man's ornament by night. The party buzzed with the kind of laughter that hides nothing. Deals were being made between sips, alliances forged between glances. I stood near the bar, a glass of red wine I hadn't touched pressed between my fingers, watching the room the way I always did, trying to map the exits. Rocco was across the floor, deep in conversation with a broad-shouldered man in gray. His jaw was tight. That meant one thing. Something wasn't going his way. I caught Serafina's eye from across the room. Sarah, my best friend, my anchor in the madness, was seated near a column, her dark eyes sharp, her posture deceptively relaxed. She gave me the smallest shake of her head, a warning, the kind only we understood. I looked away. Too late. The argument started fast. Rocco's voice cut above the ambient noise, low at first, then climbing. I didn't catch the words, just the tone, that coiling, venomous tone I'd learned to fear. He turned, found me immediately, as if I were his target and always had been. The room felt like it slowed. I saw how you looked at him. I hadn't looked at anyone. I never did. But it didn't matter. Rocco's jealousy didn't need truth as fuel. It burned on pure invention. Rocco! His hand found my hair before I finished his name. The grip was sudden and brutal. Fingers twisted into my raven hair, yanking backwards so hard my throat arched toward the chandelier light above me. Pain detonated through my scalp. My wine glass shattered somewhere below. The room went quiet with the particular silence of people who choose not to see. Tears blurred the gold and crystal ceiling above me. I heard my own sharp gasp like it belonged to someone else. Learn your place. His voice was ice, quiet now, the worst kind of quiet. And then, a hand, not his, a single sentence spoken low as distant thunder. Release her, Santori. Now. The voice didn't rise, didn't need to. It arrived in the room the way gravity arrives, simply present, undeniable, rearranging everything it touched. Rocco froze. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. I blinked through the blur of pain and found him. Dark eyes, dark suit, an expression carved from something harder than anger. He was tall, built not like a fighter, but like a man who'd long stopped needing to fight because the world yielded to him first. His jaw was sharp enough to cut, and his gaze was fixed on Rocco with the kind of calm that was more terrifying than rage. Daario Valtieri. I didn't know his name yet, but every person in that room did, and every single one of them took a step back. Something shifted in that moment, something I couldn't name and couldn't take back. Because when his eyes moved from Rocco to me, they didn't hold pity. They held recognition. Like he'd been waiting for this exact moment, like he already knew my name. and that terrified me more than anything Rocco had ever done. If the opening already has your pulse spiking, you're exactly where you're meant to be. Subscribe so the darkness finds you every time. Let me tell you who Rocco Santori was before he became the man who grabbed me by the hair in a room full of witnesses. He was charm first. Pure, effortless charm. I met him 3 years ago in the Marchesi collection, a discreet space in Rome's Prati district where I worked with pre-Renaissance artifacts. He looked at a 14th century reliquary like he understood it, like he saw beauty the way I did. I should have noticed that men like Rocco study beautiful things not to appreciate them, but to possess them. We were together 18 months before I understood what he was. By then, his world had folded around me. His contacts were my contacts. His apartment was your about. His name was attached to mine in circles I hadn't chosen to enter. Extracting yourself from a man like Rocco wasn't a clean break. It was a slow unraveling that left marks. I tried leaving once. Once was enough of a lesson. So I stayed. Existed in the careful geography of his temper, close enough not to trigger it, far enough to breathe. I worked, I curated. I kept my head down and counted the days until some version of escape appeared. Sarah knew. She'd seen the bruises I covered with long sleeves in winter. She'd heard my voice go flat when I talked about him. She kept her fury leashed because she was smart enough to know that confronting Rocco directly would only land on me afterward. "You need an exit," she'd whispered to me a month before the party. A real one, not a plan, a door. I told her I was working on it. I was lying. The truth was, I had nothing. No separate savings, no apartment in my name alone, no family who could shelter me. My mother had passed when I was 19, and my father's side were strangers. The faded Marchesi name was exactly that. Faded. A lineage with no living safety net. Rocco had made sure of that, quietly, methodically. The way a viper doesn't strike immediately. It just coils tighter. The night of Villa Corsini, I'd learned from Sarah that Rocco was trying to broker a deal with Adriano Testa, a mid-level arms broker with connections to the Morelli family. Vincenzo Vin Morelli's organization. That name meant something in Rome's underworld. It meant Rocco was trying to climb, allying himself with dangerous men to secure status he hadn't earned. I was the accessory that made him look legitimate. A woman with a cultured name, old money in her lineage if not her bank account. A veneer of refinement over his volatility. When the deal started going sideways, I still don't know the full reason, he turned that volatility on me. Because I was the nearest target. Because humiliating me publicly felt, to him, like regaining control. That was who Rocco Santori was. And when Daario Valtieri stepped in front of him and issued his quiet command, Rocco's grip on my hair didn't loosen out of fear alone. It loosened because every person in that room, himself included, knew the hierarchy. And in that hierarchy, Rocco Santori didn't exist on the same level as the man standing before him. I tumbled forward as the grip released. Strong arms caught me. The scent hit first, sandalwood, smoke, something clean under the dark. Then the voice, low and close, not for the room, but for me alone. "I have you." 3 words, simple, but nothing in my life had felt that solid in years. I looked up into eyes so dark they swallowed the light. He wasn't looking at Rocco anymore. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't read, careful, measured, and underpinned by something I couldn't name. Around us, the party slowly resumed. Glasses clinked, conversations restarted. The crowd turned away like a collective exhale, collective cowardice pretending to be discretion. Rocco stood frozen, jaw working, a vein at his temple pulsing. But he didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as Daario guided me away from the crowd, one hand at the small of my back, and the touch was so precise and unhurried, it felt like a statement. He led me through a side corridor, away from the gilded chaos, into a quiet alcove lined with oil paintings and low amber lighting. "Sit," he said. It wasn't a request, but somehow it didn't feel like a command either. I sat. He said nothing at first, just studied me the way I studied artifacts, searching for fractures, for history, for what the surface was hiding. My scalp still burned. I was fairly certain I'd bitten the inside of my cheek when Rocco yanked me backward, and the copper taste of blood hadn't fully faded. I pressed my fingertips to my temple and focused on breathing. "How long has he been doing that?" Daario asked. Direct. No warm-up, no performance of concern. I looked at him. "That's not your business." A slight tilt of his head, something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're bleeding." "I'm aware." He reached into his jacket, unhurried, deliberate, and produced a folded white handkerchief, set it on the arm of the chair beside me, didn't push it into my hands, just left it there, available. The small gesture cracked something open in me that I immediately forced shut. "Eloen Marchese," he said, and hearing my full name in his voice felt strange, like he'd been holding it a while. "Curator at the Marchese collection. You specialize in pre-Renaissance relics. You've been with Rocco Santori for approximately 3 years. You've tried to leave once." The air went cold in my chest. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know who attends events under my roof." A pause. "This is my villa, Miss Marchese. Rocco brought you here without my knowledge or approval. He was already on borrowed time before tonight." I picked up the handkerchief, pressed it to the corner of my mouth, tried to process what he was telling me. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're going to need somewhere to go." He said it the way someone states a fact about the weather. "When you leave tonight, and you will leave tonight, Rocco will not let it pass. He'll come to your apartment, your gallery, wherever he thinks he has access." My throat tightened. He wasn't wrong. I'd spent 3 years learning the precise geography of that truth. "I have a proposition," Daario said. "Nothing permanent, a temporary arrangement with clear terms." I looked at him. Really looked. The absence of warmth in his expression wasn't cruelty, it was control. The difference was significant. Rocco's cruelty came from chaos. This man's coolness came from somewhere far more deliberate. "What kind of arrangement?" "You'll stay in one of my properties, private, secured. In exchange, I require your expertise. I have an acquisition, a private collection of Etruscan artifacts with questionable provenance. I need authentication, discreet, professional, airtight." "You want me to work for you?" "I want you safe. The work is secondary." He paused. "But yes, I want your expertise." The silence stretched between us. My mind ran through every angle, every risk. "Safe," he said. I thought about my apartment, the way Rocco had a spare key, the way the building manager looked the other way, the way leaving that party tonight, after the public humiliation Daario had handed him, would not go unaddressed. "And if I refuse?" I asked. He looked at me steadily. "I'll have my men escort you to a taxi. You'll return to wherever you live, and I'll have Rocco removed from my organization's orbit. Beyond that," a fractional pause, "I won't be able to guarantee your safety." Not a threat, an honest accounting. The distinction made it harder to refuse. "If I accept," I said slowly, "I want Sarah with me. Serafina Drago. She's here tonight." Something moved in his eyes, brief, unreadable. "She's already in my circle, Miss Marchese. She has been for some time." My head snapped up. He held my gaze. "There are things Serafina will need to explain to you herself, but yes, she'll be where you are." I stared at him for a long moment. This man knew my name, my history, my best friend's loyalties, and he'd been in the same room as Rocco for God knows how long without telling me any of it. "You've been watching me." "I've been aware of you," he corrected. "There's a difference." I wasn't sure there was. But I picked up the handkerchief, folded it carefully, and set it on his knee. "I'll stay," I said. "For now." The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. "For now," he agreed. Engagement question. If you were Elle in that moment, would you have accepted Daario's offer or found your own way out? Drop your answer below. They moved me that same night. Matteo, Teo, Nero arrived in the alcove before I'd fully registered what I'd agreed to. A lean, dark-eyed man with the quiet efficiency of someone who spent his life solving problems other people created. Daario's right hand. He said almost nothing, just a low, "Miss Marchese," as he guided me toward a side exit with an almost ceremonial sense of purpose. Sarah materialized from somewhere near the main hall, a small overnight bag already in her hand. Prepared, I realized, before I'd even spoken to Daario. That realization sat heavy. "We'll talk in the car," she said when I opened my mouth. The car was a black Mercedes with tinted windows and a privacy partition. Sarah slid in beside me, and the moment the door closed, she turned to face me with an expression I hadn't seen on her in a long time. Guilt wearing the costume of practicality. "How long?" I asked. 8 months. She didn't flinch. Daario's organization approached me after the incident in February. The one you told me wasn't serious. February. When Rocco had thrown a glass at my head and I'd told Sarah I'd knocked it off the shelf myself. "They wanted information about Rocco's movements," she continued. "I gave it. In exchange," she exhaled, "protection for both of us, if it ever came to that." "You should have told me." "You would have refused. You would have tried to protect me from the risk." She met my eyes. And then February would have become March, April, until something worse happened. I stared out the window at Rome's dark streets scrolling past. The city looked the same as always, ancient and indifferent, its ruins lit gold against the black sky. I felt something similar, ancient in my exhaustion, illuminated by the impossible newness of tonight. She wasn't wrong. I hated that she wasn't wrong. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Parioli district, one of his residential properties. Private, doorman, full security detail." It was exactly what Daario had said. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt the subtle vertigo of a woman who'd traded one man's control for another's protection, and wasn't yet sure where the line between those two things lived. The apartment was beautiful. That was the first thing. The disorienting, incongruous beauty of it. Pale marble floors, walls of pale gray broken by original artwork I recognized as significant. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Parioli's quiet streets. Fresh flowers on the kitchen counter, white peonies, my favorite, which I hadn't mentioned to anyone, which meant someone had done their research. I stood in the center of the living room and turned slowly, cataloging. The bedroom had a walk-in wardrobe stocked with clothing in my size. The bathroom held products I actually used. The kitchen was fully stocked. "He's thorough," Sarah said from the doorway, reading my expression. "He's controlled," I corrected. In this world, those are the same thing. Over the next 3 days, I barely saw Daario. He was present in the structure of my life, In the security cameras I could see, in the quiet check-ins from Teo, in the car that arrived each morning to take me to the gallery where I was allowed to continue working under discreet surveillance, but not in person. I found myself noticing his absence more than I expected. Then he called. Not a message, an actual call, his voice low and unhurried. "The artifacts arrive Thursday. I'd like your assessment by Sunday." "You could have texted that," I said. A beat of silence. I could have. He didn't explain, just waited. "Fine," I said. "Thursday." "The collection includes a 7th century Etruscan bronze," he added, almost as an afterthought. "I thought it might interest you specifically." It did, intensely. I'd written my graduate thesis on Etruscan burial bronzes. I didn't tell him that, but the way the silence sat between us told me he already knew. Thursday arrived with a cold Roman rain. The artifacts were brought to a private room at the back of a Perioli townhouse, Daario's working property, Teo had called it. Not a residence, a space for business. The kind of clean, precise room that existed in multiples in men like Daario's lives, stripped of personality and built entirely for function. Except for the 7th century bronze on the central table. I stopped when I saw it. My breath made a quiet, involuntary sound. It was a female figure, a deity, probably Uni, the Etruscan Juno, cast in dark bronze gone almost black with age, her arms raised in a gesture that could have been offering or command, perfectly preserved. The detail at the base inscription was extraordinary. I'd never seen this piece in any catalog. "It's real," I said, before I'd even touched it. "I know it's real," Daario said from behind me. I turned. I hadn't heard him enter. He stood just inside the doorway, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the forearm, a detail so unexpectedly ordinary that it recalibrated something in my perception of him. He was still the same man. The weight and the presence and the darkness of him were unchanged, but something about the rolled sleeves made him seem briefly, devastatingly human. "If you know it's real, why hire an authenticator?" "Because knowing and proving are different things." He crossed to the table, standing on the opposite side. "The provenance is complicated. Previous private ownership in 3 countries, gaps in documentation between 1943 and 1961. The war years." I nodded slowly. "Someone hid it." "Or someone stole it and hid that." His dark eyes lifted to mine. "I want to know which." We worked in the same room for hours. He was quiet in a way I hadn't experienced with many people. Not performing patience, but genuinely comfortable in silence. He read, reviewed documents, made occasional calls in low Italian that I deliberately didn't absorb. At some point, he set a coffee beside me without comment. It was exactly how I took it. "You're staring," I said, not looking up from the inscription I was photographing. "I'm reading." "You've been looking at the same page for 20 minutes. A pause. "How do you know?" "The paper hasn't moved." I looked up then. He was watching me with that unreadable expression, careful, precise, like I was also something he was trying to authenticate. "How did you get into artifact curation?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. He'd shown no personal curiosity before, always transactional, always measured. "My mother," I said. "She loved old things, said they carried memories in their materials, in the metal and the clay and the bone. Said if you were still enough, you could feel them." Something shifted in his expression. "She died when you were 19. "Yes." A beat. "You've done your research." "It's necessary." "Is it?" I set down the camera. "Or is it just how you maintain control over every person in your orbit?" He was quiet for a long moment. The rain tapped at the windows. "Both," he said finally. honest. No apology in it. I should have found that answer cold. Instead, I found it oddly clarifying. At least he wasn't pretending. At least he wasn't Rocco, who dressed his control in the language of love until I couldn't tell the difference. The bronze is legitimately owned, I said, returning to the piece. The 1943 gap is wartime relocation. I can see the transfer markings on the base. Whoever moved it was protecting it, not stealing it. You're certain? Stake my reputation on it. He walked around the table, stopped beside me, close, but not crowding, looking at the bronze. Then, without warning, he looked at me. Thank you, Eloen. My name in his mouth again. Different this time. Quieter. I felt it somewhere in my sternum. Elle, I said, if we're going to be... I gestured vaguely at the room, the arrangement, all of it. Whatever this is. Elle. Elle. He tested it, nodded once. Daario. I looked back at the bronze, but I could still feel him looking at me. Engagement question. Are you team slow burn builds the best fire, or do you want Daario and Elle to finally crack? Tell us below. We're reading every comment. 3 weeks into the arrangement, Sarah told me about Chiara. We were having late coffee in the apartment, the two of us in the kitchen, the city below the windows, the particular intimacy of women who've survived things together. Sarah had been careful around me since our conversation in the car, watchful, waiting, I understood, for my anger to settle into something she could work with. There was a woman, she said, wrapping her hands around her mug. Daario's younger sister, Chiara Valtieri. I went still. She was involved with a man in the Morelli family, Vin Morelli's second, a man named Caruso. Everyone in Daario's circle knew it was wrong. Caruso had a reputation, but Chiara was 22 and headstrong, and she believed love meant something different than what everyone else was seeing. The coffee steamed between us. He put her in the hospital twice, Sarah said quietly. The second time, she didn't come home. Something cold settled in my chest. She survived, Sarah added quickly. She's alive. She lives in Florence now under a different name. Daario got her out, but, she paused, not before Caruso had already done what he did, and not before Daario held himself responsible for every day he watched and calculated and waited for the right strategic moment instead of acting. I thought about Villa Corsini, the way he'd crossed that room, the way he hadn't hesitated, not even a breath. He didn't wait this time, I said. No, Sarah looked at me. He never waits anymore. I sat with that for a long time after she went to bed. Daario Valtieri, the man who ran an empire on intelligence and strategic patience, had crossed a crowded room and intervened instantly. Not because I was useful, not because of the artifacts or the arrangement, because he'd watched a man grab a woman by the hair, and some part of him couldn't stop seeing his sister's face. I asked him about it directly. That was the kind of person I was. I'd rather walk into the difficult thing than circle it forever. We were in his working office, reviewing documentation. I set down my pen and said, Sarah told me about Chiara. The room changed. Not visibly, nothing moved, nothing altered, but the quality of the air shifted. He looked at me for a long moment. She had no right. She had every right. She's my friend. I kept my voice even. I'm not asking for details. I just wanted you to know, that I understand something about why you were in that room. His jaw tightened. That isn't why I intervened. Then why? A long, weighted silence. Because it was wrong, he said. Because it was happening in front of me. He held my gaze. And because I'd been aware of you for months, Elle, and I wasn't going to stand at the edge of that room and watch someone hurt you. Months. The word landed differently than I expected. You should have told me, Before the party. Before Rocco could. I didn't have enough to move on Rocco strategically, not without starting something that could have come back on you worse. His voice dropped a register. I was building a case, getting you out cleanly. The party accelerated things. You were protecting me from a distance, without my knowledge, for months. Yes. I should have been angry. Part of me was. But under the anger was something else. The raw, exhausted relief of realizing that for months, in a world where I had learned not to rely on anyone, someone had been paying attention. What happened to Caruso? I asked. Daario's expression didn't change. He's no longer a problem. I didn't ask for specifics. And Chiara? Something softened briefly, almost imperceptibly. She paints now, has a small studio near the Arno. She's… a pause. She's building something good. The love in his voice was quiet and devastating. I thought about my own mother, about what it meant to love someone you couldn't always protect. She's lucky to have you, I said. He looked away. I failed her. You got her out. Late. Still, he said nothing, but something in his shoulders, the barely perceptible lowering of a weight he'd been carrying, told me the word had reached somewhere. That night, I lay in the pale bedroom and stared at the ceiling and understood with quiet clarity that I was in serious trouble. Not the kind involving Rocco, the kind that lived in rolled-up sleeves and honest answers and the way a man said your name like he'd been holding it carefully. Rocco didn't disappear. Of course he didn't. A man like Rocco Santori didn't absorb public humiliation and then quietly retreat. He festered. He plotted. He found allies who wanted the same things he wanted, which meant he found his way to Vincenzo Morelli. Teo told me first, in the flat, efficient way he delivered all information. Santori has been meeting with the Morelli faction 3 times in 6 days. We believe he's offered them operational intelligence on the Valtieri network in exchange for resources, people, and weaponry to execute a targeted action. I set down my coffee cup. A targeted action against Daario. Against Daario's current priorities. Teo's eyes moved to mine briefly. Which includes you, Miss Marchesi. I was a liability. I'd known this abstractly, had understood it since the moment I accepted Daario's offer, but hearing it stated plainly in Teo's careful voice made it viscerally real. I went to Daario. He was in the villa's secure study, maps, surveillance feeds, documents, the operational center of a man who ran half a city's underworld from behind a veneer of legitimate business. He looked up when I entered without knocking. You know about Rocco and Morelli, I said. Not a question. He always knew first. Sit down, El. I'd rather stand. I crossed my arms. How bad is it? Manageable. That's not an answer. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he leaned back and told me the truth, which, I'd learned, was what he did when he'd decided the cost of lying outweighed the cost of honesty. Vin Morelli had been building a case against the Valtieri organization for 18 months. Not for law enforcement. Morelli didn't use legal systems he couldn't buy. He was building toward a hostile takeover of Daario's territory. Rocco's intelligence, routes, safe houses, personnel, was the final piece he'd needed. A coordinated attack could dismantle the Valtieri operation at multiple points simultaneously. And me? I pressed. Rocco wants to retrieve you. Personally. Daario's voice was even, but something in his hands, the way they pressed flat against the desk, told me what evenness was costing him. He's told Morelli your leverage. Leverage for what? For forcing me to back down.
He believes I have personal reasons for keeping you safe. Silence. Does he believe correctly? I asked. Daario held my gaze, not flinching. Yes, he said. Quiet. Final. The single syllable remade the room. I turned away, walked to the window. Below, Rome moved in its ancient, indifferent rhythm, taxis and tourists and the deep stone foundations of a city that had outlasted every empire that tried to own it. I'm not going to be your weakness, I said. You already are. He came to stand beside me, and I'm not apologizing for it. I looked at him. He looked back. The whole complicated weight of the past month was between us, gratitude and distrust and attraction and caution, and the particular ache of two damaged people circling something neither had intended. What happens now? I asked. Now we end it, he said, before they choose the time and place. We. He looked at me. If you're willing. I thought about Rocco's hand in my hair, about 18 months of careful geography around a man's temper, about what it felt like to exist in someone's world purely as an object to be positioned. Tell me what you need, I said. Something moved in his expression, dark and fierce and briefly unguarded. I need you to trust me, he said, completely, for what comes next. I'd spent years giving trust to someone who weaponized it. Learning to trust again was going to feel like learning to breathe after drowning. But I looked at this man, this dark, complicated, controlled man who had crossed a room for me before he had any reason to, and I said, then earn it. He earned it. Not in grand gestures, not in declarations I'd learned to mistrust. In small, consistent, deliberate things. He told me the plan in full, no curated summary, no protected sections, the whole architecture of what he intended. The decoy meeting in Testaccio to draw out Morelli's men, the secondary operation at the warehouse in Ostiense where Rocco had been staging his alliance meetings, the timeline, the personnel, the risks. You're showing me everything, I said. You asked me to earn your trust. Most men would interpret that differently.
Most men haven't spent a month watching you assess a 7th century Etruscan bronze with more precision than anyone I've paid 6 figures for professional opinions. He paused. You're not someone I need to manage, Elle. You're someone I need to not underestimate. I absorbed that, filed it somewhere careful. We worked through the details for hours. I knew Rocco's habits, his schedules, his tells, his reaction patterns under pressure. Daario knew the structural vulnerabilities in Morelli's expanded operation. Together, we built something neither of us could have alone. It was strange, that collaboration, professional and intimate in equal measure. At some point, past midnight, he made us both food. Simple, good food. Pasta with oil and garlic and herbs from the kitchen garden, and we ate at the table amid the maps and documents, and it felt devastatingly normal. What was your life like before all this? I asked. Before all what? Before the Empire. He considered this. My father ran the organization. A different kind of man. Louder, more visible, more willing to use force as a first response. A pause. He died when I was 28. It wasn't clean. What happened? Morelli's father happened. He said it without heat. Old fire, banked long ago into something that powered rather than burned. 2 families, 1 territory, and a generation of violence that produced exactly what you'd expect. And Chiara was caught in the middle. Chiara was caught in the middle of my distraction, he said. My strategic focus on the Morelli conflict meant I missed what was directly in front of me. Caruso wasn't a Morelli operative. He was just a violent man that Morelli tolerated because he was useful, a different category of threat. I wasn't watching for it. He said this with the precision of someone who had replayed the sequence many times. "You can't watch for everything," I said. "I can try." "That kind of trying costs everything," I said quietly. "I know. I spent 3 years trying to track all the ways Rocco could hurt me. You exhaust yourself, and then you lose anyway." He was very still. "What changed for you?" he asked. "The night you decided to accept my offer?" I thought about it. "You left the handkerchief and didn't push." I met his eyes. "You gave me a choice without performing the giving. That was—" I searched for the word. "That was unfamiliar." Something in his face shifted. Barely, but I'd grown fluent in the small vocabulary of his expressions. Don't," I shook my head. "Not yet. Let's get through what's coming first." He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the characteristic precision that defined him, he nodded. "After then," he said. That word, after, sat in my chest for the rest of the night. Warm, dangerous, hopeful in a way I hadn't let myself be in a long time. Teo came in the early morning with confirmation. Rocco had agreed to attend a meeting in Testaccio. The decoy was working, and Morelli's team had been observed moving toward Ostiense. "Tonight," Daario said. I looked at him across the table. The maps between us. The whole fragile, hard-won architecture of trust we'd built over 4 weeks. I thought about the woman I'd been at Villa Corsini, rigid with fear in a red dress, a man's hand in her hair, waiting for someone to look away. I wasn't that woman anymore. Or maybe I was, but I'd stopped waiting. Engagement question. We're almost at the final act. Who do you want Elle to take down herself? Drop Rocco or Morelli below and tell us why. The rain came back that night. Rome in November, relentless and biblical, drumming on stone that had absorbed 1,000 years of storms. The warehouse in Ostiense smelled of rust and standing water. Industrial dark, broken only by the cold blue glow of surveillance equipment Teo's team had installed over the previous 48 hours. I'd insisted on being there. Daario had argued, controlled, thorough arguments that I dismantled point by point with his own logic. "You said you didn't need to underestimate me," I'd said. A pause. Then, "Vest, stay behind Teo. You do not move without instruction." I agreed. I was reckless about a lot of things, but I wasn't stupid. Rocco arrived first. Always Rocco, I thought. Always the man who couldn't read a room or a situation, who charged into things operating on ego and adrenaline. He came with 4 of Morelli's men, which told me his own people had already started abandoning him. The alliance was transactional and thin. I could see it in the way the men positioned themselves, close enough to do Morelli's work, not close enough to die for Rocco's pride. Daario's team moved like water. No noise, no wasted motion. It happened fast, faster than the movies make it look. Less dramatic, more clinical. Teo's men cut off the exits in under 30 seconds. Morelli's 4 went down without shots fired, zip ties and pressure points, a language of force that didn't need to shout. Rocco stood in the center of the warehouse, with no exits and no allies. And for one suspended moment, I watched him understand exactly how far his ego had carried him from solid ground. He saw me. Something ugly moved across his face. "You," he started. "Don't," Daario said, stepping forward. Just the word. Just that weight. But Rocco had always been at his most dangerous when cornered. He reached. Fast, faster than I expected, and a blade appeared, and he lunged not toward Daario, but toward me. Because that was who Rocco Santori had always been, a man who hurt women to get to men. Time went strange. Daario moved and took the graze across his forearm that had been angled at my face. The cut wasn't deep, but the blood was immediate and real, and something inside me, something cold and old and finished with waiting, crystallized. I reached into Daario's coat. My fingers found the grip of the pistol he'd insisted I carry since the arrangement began. Rocco was still fighting, still struggling against Daario's grip on his knife wrist, and I stepped forward and I pressed the barrel to his temple, and I said, "Enough." My voice didn't shake. Rocco went very still. The warehouse was silent except for rain. "I'm not going to shoot you," I said, "because I'm not you. But I want you to understand, very clearly, that this is over. Every version of this, every future version you're imagining." I looked him in the eyes, those familiar, terrible eyes I'd been afraid of for 3 years. "You don't have access to me anymore. You don't have access to this city's power structures anymore. You are done." He stared at me. I watched the calculation run across his face, and then I watched it stop, because there was nothing left to calculate. "Teo," Daario said quietly. Teo stepped in. The blade was secured. Rocco was restrained. The warehouse became procedural. I lowered the gun. My hands weren't shaking. I was shaking everywhere else. Daario appeared beside me. He took the gun gently. Then, and I hadn't expected this, not then, not with blood on his sleeve and rain hammering the roof, he cupped my face in both hands and looked at me the way I'd looked at the bronze, like he was reading every age ring, every hidden history, everything real beneath the surface. "You're all right," he said, quietly, for me alone. "I know," I said. "I know you know." The corner of his mouth moved. "I needed to say it anyway." I kissed him. Not gently, not tentatively. I kissed him the way you kiss someone when you've been circling the inevitability for a month and the adrenaline has burned every remaining reason not to. He kissed me back, with the same absolute precision he brought to everything else, certain, unhurried, total. Around us, Teo's team professionally found other things to look at. Vin Morelli escaped that night. Teo's team caught 2 of his 3 lieutenants, but Vin himself slipped the Testaccio decoy operation 20 minutes before the net closed. Daario's expression when he got the report was controlled and very, very still. "He'll surface again," he said. "And when he does, we'll be ready." I believed him. Teo was wounded in the secondary operation, a shoulder, nothing fatal, but enough to leave him grounded for 6 weeks. I sat with him at the private clinic while Daario handled the operational aftermath, and we talked about nothing important, and Teo looked at me once with an expression that said more than he'd ever say aloud. "Thank you for not running." I squeezed his hand. He looked away. The sentiment had been expressed and received. That was enough. 2 months later, I moved the Marchesi collection to a new location, a gallery space in Parioli, 2 streets from Daario's primary residence. The acquisition came with quiet financial backing that I didn't ask too many questions about. I knew whose money it was. I chose to accept it the way I was learning to accept other things, with clear eyes and without pretending the world was simpler than it was. Sarah never apologized for the 8 months of secrecy. I never asked her to. We sat on the gallery floor the night before the opening, surrounded by crates and packing paper and a bottle of Barolo, and she said, "You're happy." Not a question. I thought about what happiness meant in a life that had been remade 3 times over. Once by loss, once by a viper's charm, once by the strange alchemy of danger and honesty, and a man who'd left a handkerchief on a chair arm and not pushed. "I'm building something," I said. "That's close enough." She poured more wine. "Good enough for me." Daario came to the opening. He stood in the back, suited, unsmiling, slightly apart from the crowd, exactly as he was everywhere. Watching. Present. I found him near the Etruscan bronze at the end of the evening. The same piece. Now properly documented, properly authenticated, properly home. "Uni," he said, studying the figure's raised arms. "Yes." I stood beside him. The Etruscans believed she protected marriages, transitions, the space between one life and the next. He was quiet for a moment. "Appropriate," he said. I looked at him. He looked at me. The same recognition that had been in his eyes at Villa Corsini, but different now. Warmer, earned on both sides. "We still have Morelli," I said. "Yes." "And whatever comes after Morelli." "Yes." "I'm not afraid of that." "I know." He took my hand. His grip was exactly what it always was, certain, unhurried, total. "That's why I'm not letting go." Below the gallery windows, Rome moved in its ancient rhythm. The city didn't care about our story. It had outlasted every empire, every heartbreak, every hard-won love. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't trying to outlast anything. I was just here, present, in the space between one life and the next. Building. And that, my loves, is where I'll leave them. Eloen Marchesi, who survived a viper's cage and chose, deliberately, with full knowledge of the cost, to step into something darker and truer. Daario Valtieri, who built his empire on control and discovered that the one thing he couldn't control was the precise, stubborn, brilliant woman who made him want to try anyway. Not a fairy tale, a real thing, forged in rain and risk and the slow architecture of trust rebuilt from wreckage. Vin Morelli is still out there. The story isn't over, but their story, the story of who they are to each other, the foundation they've built, that's not a question anymore. If this story found something in you tonight, a pulse, a breath held, a moment where you forgot where you were, then you know what to do. Subscribe, hit that notification bell, because the darkness has more stories, and you deserve to be there when they arrive. Leave me a comment. Whose story should come next? A rival who becomes something more? A loyal soldier with secrets? An enemy forced into an alliance? I read every single one. Until then, stay safe in the light, my loves, and if you must wander into the dark, make sure you choose the right kind of darkness, the kind that knows your name. Finn.